collective memory that we came from that land, and we have a strong yearning to return to that land. Some stayed there, some left, and most left the land. Now, not only do we have a strong yearning, we have strong archaeological evidence. Like, it's everywhere, all over Israel, the Jews were there. So for me, is when the right for self-determination was granted to the Jewish people in that land, it is up to those people to determine who
Content over everything!
can live there, who can't. Just like the British have the right to set their immigration policy. Now, largely born out of the persecution of Jews around the world by different nations, be it Muslim, Christian, whomever, we were slaughtered wholesale. What they did, they set up a law which was actually based on Nazi, not Jewish law, on Nazi law, which said the Nazis would kill anyone that had a Jewish grandparent. So the Jewish state said anyone who has a Jewish state said anyone who has a Jewish grandparent has the right to move here to escape persecution. So halakhically, which is by Jewish law, they're not considered Jews. Yet in a bizarre twist of fate, we've let our definition of the state be determined by Nazis so that we can save and rescue Jews.
So you're not Israeli. Yeah, so I think maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were kind of suggesting that Jews of European descent perhaps have less of a right to settle in Israel than the Jews that were from the Middle East.
Well, I don't know. So you have more.
There's no difference between ISIS and Israel.
So what I would, and a lot of people often say that, maybe you won't say, but a lot of people often say that. So what I would say in response is that a lot of black people were removed from Africa 400 years ago against your will. But you wouldn't say that those people who were removed from Africa 400 years ago, black people, no longer have a right to that land or to build on that land or to go back.
I wouldn't say it, no, definitely. But to make it make more sense in the context of the conversation, I think what we're trying to establish is why is it that the European Jews might be catching a particular kind of discrimination opposed to, say, others, right? That's where I'm going, right?
Discrimination in Israel?
Well, anywhere, really. Right?
Why do you discriminate?
Well, before we get there, what I'm saying is we were trying to identify different types of Jews, right? So right now we have Nigerians and Jamaicans. We understand at one point the Jamaicans might have been in Nigeria, right?
Yeah.
Because of the transatlantic slave trade, unfortunately we're somewhere else. So what we're trying to establish is that connection between the land, right? Okay. So that's where the conversation is going.
So it's actually where we started. So what happened was the Jews were taken out of Israel by the Romans. They were, and this is where the most Ashkenazim, we believe, came from. They were taken to Italy as captives, and if you go to Rome, you can see Titus's Arch, which has like the engraving that the Romans, where they plundered Jerusalem and took away the menorah, the candelabrum. And so Jewish slaves were taken to Italy. From Italy, they then migrated north into Germany, Poland, and the rest of Europe. So that's how we came to be in Europe largely. We were taken on ships, not too dissimilar to the history of how Africans came to be in America. And so we were taken as war captives, as slaves. We were enslaved by the Romans. We were hunted in their colosseums for sport. We were like, we also have a horrible history of persecution, both of our people. And so to his point is, we haven't, just like Africans, you've got a brother who doesn't know how long ago his family left Africa, yet has a strong connection with the land. So much so that when I asked him, he's a Muslim? Is that okay? You're Muslim? But when I asked you why you're here, it wasn't Islam. It's like, I'm a Pan-Africanist. And so that's like you're driving. And so it's a huge part of your identity, just like being... Almost an assalamu alaikum. Salam alaikum.
So I think it's an interesting point. What I was going to say is just how our friend here can't pinpoint whether his ancestors were from Nigeria or Ghana or somewhere else in West Africa. You can, okay, but some people can't.
Long research.
And Ashkenazi Jews can do blood DNA.
Is that what you find? You find that when the Ashkenazi Jews do blood DNA, they find that they are...
Particularly through the Kohanim, particularly through a sect of Jews called the Kohanim, the Kohens. You can find genetic markers which are common through Kohanim, not only from people from Poland, but also from Ethiopia, Jews in Ethiopia, Jews all over the...
Some might make a distinction between Chinese Jews, Ethiopian Jews, and European Jews. Does that make sense, right? As a matter of fact, the Jews might have made a distinction themselves.
We do.
Exactly, right? So this is the...
But the distinctions we make are based... So the distinction we make is based largely on the prayer rite. People mistakenly believe it's based on ethnicity. It isn't. So the Ashkenaz is the Hebrew name for Germany. The Ashkenazim actually aren't necessarily from Germany. They can be from anywhere, but they follow the prayer rites and the customs. So the minhagim, which is the customs, and the nusach, which is the prayer rite of the Ashkenaz community. The Sephardim follow this community. Sephardim is Spain. They follow the customs of the Spanish and Portuguese, and then collectively that's also now describes the Jews of the Middle East, because that's prayer rites spread east. And so for us, ethnicity has never been that important. What's important is basically the community you descend from, and it comes via the father. And so we have very mixed. So my haplotype, genetically, my haplotype is African and Israeli. It's E1, B1, whatever it is, which is not. It's not a European. It's not. My family, my Jewish family, are Polish. So I've got Ashkenazi DNA. I've also got lots of Irish DNA, a little bit of English DNA. But and then it also says like biblical Israel, which maybe it's Canaanite or something. But my DNA.
What percent connects you to the land of Israel?
So all Ashkenazi DNA, basically a third of my DNA. The bit which isn't Jewish, which it just says like it says Western Middle Eastern, and like basically draws a map around biblical Israel. That was like tiny. It was like 3%. So I would imagine that's. Whereas I've got more European DNA than I have, and that's because most of my great grandparents were European rather than Jewish. But Judaism doesn't work like that. Judaism either comes via the mother or you convert, and so. That's why Jews look different in different lands, but we don't define ourselves on that.
Can you convert, and then once you convert, you have a stake in Israel? Is that how it works?
So once you join the Jewish people, then you have a right to live in the Jewish homeland, the Jewish national home, yeah.
And
Is it a possibility that a lot of the Zionists in that early century, like the 18th, 19th century, as you said, could have been reverts or converts into Judaism?
No. The overwhelming majority of Jews do not descend from converts. They go all the way, but we have common ancestors. We can trace our DNA all the way back to Israel. But there will have been converts.
Throughout the Jewish history in Europe, there were conversions, there were intermarriages, all of that kind of stuff, which is why you have so much of our genetics which belong to other people. But that doesn't mean we're any less Jewish, do you?
Many people who try to undermine the Semitic roots of Jews often claim that, of the Ashkenazi, they like to claim that most Ashkenazi are descended from the Khazars. But the Khazars moved south into the Caucasus, whereas the Ashkenazi, I think they tended to come from Germany and ultimately from Spain,
So basically,
via the Rhineland.
So to really reinforce that point, before the Kingdom of Khazaria, there was Jewish Ashkenazi communities in Europe. So it's like we have ancient cemeteries, we have ancient communities that long predate Khazaria. So it's one of those. It's usually used by people who want to attack the idea of Jewish.
The so-called Khazar, if the majority did become Jews,
It's fine. It's fine. My but can I just keep that inside? Sorry.
Find their descendants in the Caucasus, the so-called mountain Jews, the Caucasus Jews of Dagestan, Chechnya, and Ossetia.
So in Israel,
these are likely to be descended from
how is
the
the power
Khazars.
structure in Israel? So who is the ruling elite in Israel?
So again, what most people, in the same way that if you look at most Western nations, and Jews don't see themselves, we don't divide ourselves into these ethnic categories, but other people do.
Right.
And so as an example, the poorest community in Israel isn't Ethiopian Jews. It isn't say Arabs. The poorest community in Israel is Haredi, so ultra-Orthodox Jews. So
They don't work.
not anymore. It used to be. It's not the case anymore. For instance, in education, the group that outperforms anyone else in terms of religious communities are Christian Arabs. And so what people tend to do, they look at the surnames of, say, prime ministers and presidents and say, aha, they're all Ashkenazim. But the reason for the historical legacy of Ashkenazim being in more senior positions was because if you were a Jew coming from Ethiopia, your education will have been very limited. If you were a Jew that was coming from, let's say, Germany, your education, your life experiences pre-coming there would have been incredibly, far more developed than your Ethiopian cousin. What's gradually happening as everyone comes to the land over the age, over the years, those divisions are becoming less pronounced.
That's not to say. We have to be honest. That's not to say that there's no racism in Israel. There's a lot of racism.
And racism, it's not that you're talking about how different communities
This is
are
where I
doing.
want to go, because this is where I step in.
There's racism
The Ashkenazi, being
in
more highly educated, have more opportunities.
Not anymore. Historically, some and not all Ashkenazim.
So if historically that was the case, that was back in the 40s,
So with Israel's
50s,
only 70 years old.
Still,
So yeah.
but that was still back in the days, right? Today, because men have children, women have children,
so
right?
the Ethiopian Jews came over in the 90s.
Okay.
So like it's relatively
Why was that?
recent.
Why
Why
not?
They were persecuted. They were persecuted by Marxists in Ethiopia,
Okay.
and they were rescued by Israel.
They lived happily in Ethiopia for a while.
And to be honest, if you ask, almost all Ethiopian Jews love
complicated.
living in Israel. And there's either 800 or I think there's 800 Jews left in Ethiopia, which my organisation is actively campaigning to bring back to Israel.
A lot of them were refugees. I mean, refugees in the way we would understand it. I've got Ethiopian friends who literally up sticks and walked from Ethiopia to Israel. A lot of them are orphans now. Their parents, one or more parents, died along the way. You know, it was a huge national effort in Israel to airlift a huge number over as well. So
Was there a delay process on bringing them to Israel?
there was a crisis in Ethiopia at that time, and that's
So
why
when
he's asking.
Israel was founded, they didn't go straight to Ethiopia.
To answer your question, there was a religious question, which was answered whether they are Jews, and the leader of the Sephardi community, so the Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, he ruled that they are categorically Jewish. Like there's no doubt. They went through what was called Gerut Lechumra, just to be sure, because their traditions were very different to the wider Jewish communities. They didn't have, for instance, the oral tradition, because they went to Ethiopia before the Babylonian exile, before we codified all of the oral law, which all normative Jews follow today. And so there was definitely questions: are they Jewish?
Right.
And the Jews ruled that. Most Jews ruled that they are. There are still, to be honest, truthfully, there are still small communities of ultra-Orthodox Jews that don't recognise them as Jewish, and I believe they're wrong. They're absolutely wrong. Ethiopian Jews are as Jewish as any other Jews.
There are also Ethiopian historians who undermine their
Interestingly,
Jewishness.
there are
For example,
other
in
small
the Cambridge
communities
history of Africa,
in Africa.
several Ethiopian scholars undermined their Jewishness by pointing out that they became Judaized simply because Ethiopia was cut off from the mainstream Christendom as a result of the Islamic domination of Egypt and the Middle East, and they developed Judaic ideas and a Judaic mythology to set themselves apart from other Christians, and they then developed the notion that they are the 12th tribe of Israel. This is like Ethiopian historians who
Just going to say, and that's why Ovadia Yosef, the chief rabbi of the Sephardim, he ruled that there had to be a Gerut Lechumra, which is like a conversion, like just to be careful, which is usually if you convert to Judaism, it takes like 3 to 7 years. It can take a long time, but for the Ethiopian community it was instant, just because their traditions were so different from Whiteside, just to make sure so no one could ever question whether they're Jewish or not. And there was what's called the Gerut Lechumra.
So what is spearheading the mistreatment that some of the Ethiopian...
I don't believe there is that. There's racism in Israel, just like there's racism here. You have the EDL, you have far-right movements
Why is
here.
that? What is pushing?
So what I was trying to say. So I believe that the majority racism that exists in Israel today isn't targeted at Ethiopian Jews. It's targeted at Sudanese asylum seekers and refugees and economic migrants, but migrants who are coming from Africa who aren't Jewish. Largely the Ethiopian Jews, while they may not be yet as in the same socio-economic bracket as say the, for the reasons we said, they came there in the 90s, so they haven't yet had time. They're not like 2, 3, 4 generations in of like Israeli education. I didn't say inshallah, I'm talking the wrong code. In Yitzhak Hashem, that will happen in the very near future. We'll see that balancing out.
What about Moroccan Jews? Moroccan Jews have been there for a long time, and they're economically and socially marginalised in Israel.
So I would say
they represent a high proportion of criminal activity within the Jewish community within Israel is by Moroccan Jews who are marginalised economically and socially, and they've been there since, I don't know, the 60s, 70s.
So what you say, is that what you're saying correct?
So is that right?
half right and half not right. So historically, I believe that many of the early socialist European Jews that came over had negative images of the Jews from North Africa. And there was definitely persecution, not persecution, but discrimination in the early days.
So from
By
by the ruling elite.
and that you have like racial slurs which are used to.
I mean, so I want to talk to you about Israel, Zionism, and the whole idea behind it as a whole. But I want to I just want to put out there that's what I want to talk about. But if you guys want to talk about the racial dynamics of Israel, I'll let you guys finish that conversation first.
No, go ahead.
You were here first. You were here first.
Sorry, no, 'cause I just wanted to say, like, with Israel and the ideology of Zionism, which Israelis get their homeland. Now you have the homeland. I just want to ask, like, 'cause my thing is about the question around anti-Semitism. Because I asked you a series of questions that if I asked them in a different way or as seen differently, they would have been seen as anti-Semitism. It would have been seen as me questioning the right of Israel to survive. And like I said, I feel like there seems to almost be like a very, you can't criticize or even talk about the Israeli state or the Jewish state without almost erring onto that, into that area of anti-Semitism once again. And I want to say, if I was to take this position, and this position I'm going to take right now, I believe Israel, as holding the nuclear weapons and as having a more sophisticated economy than all of its neighbors, it should take the higher road in dealing with its neighbors. Would that be an anti-Semitic statement?
No, and I think it does take the moral. I think it does take the moral. I think if you look at its neighbour, look at Syria. Look at Syria. Yeah, Syria's next door to Israel. Yeah. What's Bashar al-Assad doing to Bashar the butcher? What's he doing to the Muslims?
Yeah, for sure, he's a butcher, just like you said.
What are Daesh doing?
Butchering Muslims.
Like literally, you look at all the states that surround Israel. 100%. Israel operates at a far higher level. When Israel goes into Gaza, they went in with paint guns last time. Like literally, on the border, they're shooting people with paint guns.
You're comparing the actions of Israel to the actions of terrorists. You know, you got
because I'm not racist. I'm not racist. But I don't see Arabs as lesser than Jews.
But ISIS is not terrorists.
Comparing Israel to
no, because I look at Arabs as being equal to Jews, and if the Arab nations surrounding Israel have a low nation.
ISIS
I mean, they were. They established. They established the Khilafah.
They were bad dudes, but Israel should be a lot better.
Israel is a lot better.
Yeah, and that's good, but it's not perfect. And there are a lot of things Israel do that are wrong, and we shouldn't be afraid of saying.
What did they do that's wrong? Let me not take away from your point.
Go ahead.
What did Israel do that is wrong?
So obviously, as a country, they do things wrong. No. So listen, I have serious issues with Israeli policy. For example, I'm sure Joe's about to shout me down, but
I'm not going to shout you down.
From my,
maybe interject.
He'll disagree or whatever. From my perspective, some of their actions for example, the recent conflict on the Gaza border were disproportionate. I think if you look at the amount of deaths that were caused, the amount of people that they shot, I think that other countries, they put it a different way. I think Israel could have been more measured.
Yeah.
So my response to that is,
I mean, what I see is people throwing stones and rocks.
It's more than that. It's more than stones and rocks.
Grenades.
It's more than stones and rocks, and a lot of people that were shot ended up being, and it was admitted by Hamas, they were Hamas operatives, they had guns, they were wearing military uniforms, all the rest of it, and that's all fine, and we can accept that. But also you can't make the claim credibly that the only people that Israel shot dead were militants, because a lot of them ended up not being. A lot of them ended up being
to respond to everything, first thing you have to step back one further, and you have to look at Gaza itself. So I will accept hand on heart, the situation in Gaza is horrible. The situation in the West Bank is very different. The Palestinians in the West Bank have a lot of money. I see more Range Rovers in Ramallah than I see in Hampstead, and I'm not joking. There's big villas, big mansions. I've made videos about it. You can go on my channel, Israel Advocacy Movement, and look at those videos. In Gaza it's different. I would hate to be a child born into Gaza, because, and who's responsible? Four parties. You've got Hamas, obviously. Fatah is more hated, the PLO are more hated than the Israelis by the people in Gaza, because they don't pay the bills, the electricity gets cut off, all kinds of... You've got Egypt that has a border, so responsible for the blockade, and then you have Israel. When it came to the recent conflict, Israel basically, and I've spoken to senior figures in the IDF, they basically have a which any state should do, they have a zero tolerance state policy. They do not want one Israeli, be he Arab, be he Jew, be he Christian, be he Muslim, they don't want one Israeli to get killed. And so when Hamas, who are a terrorist force, are breaching the fence, when they're cutting the fence, when they're throwing grenades, and when they're shooting at Israelis, they shoot back and they have a more sophisticated weaponry, and unfortunately that leads to a disproportionate death toll. What you have to question is why. If they weren't cutting the fence and trying to charge into Israel to kill Israelis, nobody would get killed. Like literally, if the protests weren't taking place, the riots weren't taking place, they weren't coming. So there's one thing to protest on your side. There's another thing to cut the fence.
If there wasn't a blockade, then there wouldn't be protests.
But they're not doing it in Egypt.
No, because they.
Why aren't they doing it in Egypt? Why aren't they cutting through in Egypt?
I think we know why they're not doing it.
Why? I don't. Tell me.
The political target seems to be Israel.
Because their political target is Israel, and they hold Israel responsible.
But Gaza has two borders.
Okay, but we're talking about Israel's actions. We can also criticise Egypt separately. We're talking about Israel at the moment. Israel has a particular responsibility to act.
The reason they're going on the Gaza fence, on the Israeli fence, is because they want to get into Israel, Hamas, and kill Israelis.
100%.
They don't want to go into Egypt and kill Egyptians, and that's why Israel uses what you call disproportionate force.
Do they want to kill Israelis or do they want to protest?
No, they want to kill Israelis. They hand out maps.
All the protesters are Hamas.
Just one point to that. Hamas hand out maps of where the Jewish villages are around the Gaza fence and give instructions to kill Israelis. Like the objective of breaching the fence.
The Palestinians on the Gaza fence are not a homogenous group. They're not just Gaza. They're not just Hamas operatives. They're also civilians.
Who drives them out? Who drives them out there?
Hamas has a responsibility. I'm not
Hamas. Who puts the children on the front line?
Hamas does.
Exactly.
Okay, but that doesn't give Israel the right to shoot.
Pardon?
They're still citizens making their own choice. So they can make a choice. Say, you know what, Hamas have a bus going into the border. I want to protest the border. I might want to protest how the rest of Hamas want to protest, but I still want to protest the border because I think that's my right.
That's fine. I agree. They have a right to do that.
But then what happens is they get all seen as one crowd, and you start firing your big guns, much bigger guns.
It's not what happens. If you look at the protests, you have a protest here, which is a long way away from the fence, and then you tend to have pockets of a large density of often like younger men of a militant age who are trying to breach the fence.
Men who think
but they're away from the responsible protesters.
Right?
But anyway, he was basically the question was, does Israel ever do wrong? There's policies I disagree with Israel. I think the policy on Sudanese asylum seekers, economic refugees from Africa, I think their policy there is wrong. I think we should give them citizenship.
Is there any treatment that Israel has done to the Palestine that you were most disagreeing to? That you were just like, I am appalled by this. What is the most?
I'd say truthfully, I don't know the most appalled, but truthfully,
you don't know the most.
Can I just answer your question?
My answer.
I'm trying.
May I finish the answer? Yeah. So is there action that the Israeli government, the Israeli community have done? Towards the Palestinian community at all, that you were most like I
was going to answer that.
I just have to get it clear because I
was going to answer that. Sorry,
you may.
I understood it the first time.
There you go. 10 points.
So I actually don't agree with the blockade of Gaza. That's an example of a policy I don't agree with. I absolutely understand why it's in place, and I definitely hold Hamas, Fatah, Egypt, and Israel responsible. But I think there are more effective way. I think the best way to build peace between Israelis and Palestinians is to build up the economy in Gaza, is to build up the Palestinian economy. I think where there's economic prosperity, there's less likely to be conflict because people have more to lose. If you're driving a Range Rover and living in a bigger villa in a village outside of Ramallah, you're going to be less likely to go to war with the Israelis because you've got an awful lot to lose. And so I believe that rather than blockade, we should be building economic ties with the people in Gaza. But that's just my personal opinion.
That's good. So what happens when you build a blockade? So have you seen any action from the Palestinians that you can equate to the fact that there is now a blockade?
Can I say an action? Yeah, absolutely. They fired tens of thousands of missile rockets into Israel.
Right. So you understand that the blockade might be a cause of.
No, the rockets predate the blockade. The blockade came later.
But do you think the blockade helps or encourages?
I think the blockade
stops them getting missiles.
The blockade minimises the blockade.
Doesn't it make more of those young men that you're talking about who are carrying up this fence, who are growing up thinking, "Yo, I didn't fire no missiles into Israel. I didn't do nothing to Israel.
Which is why
this is my view as land."
So to that exact point. The blockade didn't create the problem, but it doesn't solve the problem either. And so I think that the problem of people in Gaza hating Israel long predates any blockade, and all the blockade does is minimise the amount of Israeli civilians. However, the life of a child living in Gaza, who 5 years old, I mean, it's compared to places like Eritrea, it's actually better, but it's definitely not Ramallah, and it's definitely not Tel Aviv. So it could be improved, massively improved.
So what could the Jewish community do to improve the conditions of the Palestinians?
So this is the thing, it's who's responsible. So I see the responsibility lies on the shoulders of the Palestinians.
Israel, not the Jewish community.
Well,
Israeli community.
Israel, I say Israel. Yeah. Well, the Jewish community in Israel, but I guess not all identify.
you mean
the Israeli government?
Yeah, the Israeli government.
Yeah, because not everyone in Israel is Jewish.
No.
And so I think the response, and this is where I probably differ from you guys, I think the majority of responsibility doesn't actually lie on the shoulders of the Israelis, because if the Palestinians put their arms, if Hamas tomorrow said, look, we recognise Israel, we put down our arms, we want peace, I reckon there'd be a Palestinian state tomorrow, genuinely. I think
Palestinians want things from Israel other than just peace.
Exactly.
What else they want?
I'll say the chant, which you'll find on any, never mind in the Palestinian territories, which are way more violent and hostile to Israel than here. If you go on any march around here for a bit of pro-Palestinian march, they shout from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which basically means marching from, say, Gaza City all the way to Tel Aviv, driving the Jews into the sea. Even the PLO, who are the moderates, Article 6 of their charter says any Jew that's living here in our area that wasn't here before 1917, we're going to basically ethnically cleanse. We're going to drive out because they're Jews.
But a lot of Palestinians don't agree with that. A lot of Palestinians would be satisfied with Gaza and the West Bank.
So I was recently meeting with the research organisation which basically informs the Palestinian National Authority's policies, and they did a survey joint with Tel Aviv University, interestingly, which found that amongst 18 to 25-year-old Palestinians in the West Bank, 18 to 20, they want to live under Israel. I said, what do you mean they want to live under Israeli rule? And he said, because under Israel, they see Israel throwing their corrupt politicians in jail. They want that for the Palestinians. They want to throw Abu Mazen in jail. They want to throw their corrupt leaders in jail. But they haven't given up their national aspiration. They still want the Palestinian state.
They also want state.
But they say they become the majority population and they get their state that way rather than in violence. But the conflict is way more complex than most people make out over here.
But I think it's a lot more complex than from the road to the sea, as you put it. I don't think they necessarily want to drive all Israelis into sea. But I think there's a massive issue. I think there's some do. I think there's a massive issue. Yeah, massive. I think there's a massive issue with this idea that if you're going to create a state for the Palestinian people, Israelis are going to be benevolent and say, okay, you can have the Gaza Bank and all of this, and I think that's going to be fine with the Palestinians, who are going to be economically disadvantaged, who are supported economically and militarily by huge backing of the world.
Sorry, who backs Israel?
Israel, America, United States.
How does America back Israel?
The United States of America doesn't back Israel in any way.
So what they have something which is mislabeled as aid. It comes out of their budget.
AIPAC.
No,
Yeah.
AIPAC.
American
AIPAC's just Jews who live in Israel.
I know what it is. They lobby, the huge powerful
Palestinians lobby
in America. Yeah, I know this.
Palestinians lobby all over the world.
But you don't disagree that America is a key Israeli ally.
I don't understand what he's saying.
Yes, it's
a fact.
confusing where you come from sometimes.
He jumps around because he wants to act like Israel's all alone and being attacked like some victim ideology. But Israel has the nuclear weapons, has all the money, has all the power in the situation.
Okay, so
doing way better than the Palestinians.
Can I respond to
is Israel doing better than Palestinians? Can we agree on that?
One of the biggest.
So if Palestine was to get a state tomorrow, the relationship between the two states would be massively imbalanced. Massively imbalanced. So it's not just easy as saying, okay, Palestinians, put down your weapons, stop protesting, come and talk to us, and we'll let you have a state. Because they understand directly they're not going to get a fair treatment out of the state. They have never got really a fair. The state that the Palestinians get given will not.
It will be poorer than Israel.
Much poorer than Israel. They probably won't get East Jerusalem. They probably won't get much of the settlement territories.
And therefore they shouldn't have a state at all.
No, my point is that to take a point or a position that the Israelis are being the only ones reasonable in the situation, and by saying, stop protesting and come to the table, and not understanding that as Israelis we maybe have to take an extra step because actually we are in a much better position, kind of like a grown man talking to a child in some ways. Not to say that the Palestinians are children.
There still needs to be a negotiation.
I have the resources.
Both sides need to give up things. Both sides need to give up things because the Palestinians have demands which Israel can't.
Sure, but the Palestinians have had many things taken from them.
But they've also been offers by Israel.
Well, we just agreed that they had an embargo put on them. So what do you mean? What? They have an embargo put over them, so they can't really trade through their own.
So that's Gaza. I mean, talking the West Bank. The West Bank's very different.
Gaza's they're separated from each other.
But they always were going to be. Do you know that in No. In 1948,
that was the
happened?
plan.
If you look at the petition plan from what it originally was to where it is today, it's gotten drastically smaller. And
This is not true.
And on the West Bank, where the Israeli community aren't even supposed to be building, you've been building settlements for years now.
Okay, we've jumped around a lot of points. Which is more important that I address? The aid, the US. So I address all of them.
No, I mean, you can address whatever you want.
Please, let me try and address each one of those. So first and foremost, you said that Israel isn't alone. If you actually look at the United Nations and the global community, there is no nation that has been condemned and criticised as much as the Jewish state. Disproportionately more resolutions than at a time when Syria was massacring tens of thousands of people. They received 2 UN resolutions. Israel received dozens in that same time frame.
Israel's always under threat.
So-
Israel's been invaded 5-6 times.
Israel
by its neighbours.
is alone. You may not like that. You may say it's with America.
Every time Israel's been invaded, Israel's beaten back their invaders, taken more land beating back their invaders,
so this is
settled on more land. And
the next
I wouldn't
point-
be surprised if Israel was using Mossad to encourage some of these invasions, so that, as an
that's,
excuse to
no,
get
No,
more
you're
land.
getting crazy.
Why is that crazy?
Habibi.
Because it isn't true and there's no
So
evidence for it.
the Mossad
but-
is now controlling
I'm
the Arab
saying,
armies that
I'm putting
invaded
forward
and killed.
there's a possibility. Are you saying that
There's a
secret?
possibility of anything, but there isn't
Okay,
a probability
so-
of it.
okay.
So,
Are we
so-
saying that
so-
Israel wasn't supported by the West? Is that they haven't?
Israel
No, it's
is
supported by the West.
Israel isn't supported with the West. It has trading relations with the West. So in 1948, when Israel was
they're
created,
strategic. Joseph,
in
they're strategic allies.
1948, when
Massive
Israel
strategic
in
allies.
1940,
I don't think there's any-
how
You guys,
I need to go as
how
well,
does
'cause I don't know
Israel
why
have
we're arguing this
strategic
point.
allies
So you don't
with the
think
West?
Britain is an ally of Israel?
I think that Britain
Where you going, Mr.
abstained from the creation of Israel, didn't
Talk
vote.
about that. What about now?
Talking about in what way? We have trading relationships
So
with them.
for example,
building,
Israel doesn't want Britain to recognise the Palestinian state, and Britain doesn't recognise the Palestinian state, whereas other countries do. That's one way. That's one example that Britain is showing themselves to be an ally of Israel, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
And to be fair, it's not a bad thing, it's just a fact, do you know what I mean? And what I'm saying is, one second, I'm just making a quick to I didn't come here prepared to have this conversation, I would have come with a bit more evidence or facts, but the fact is, we all know, I don't understand why we get caught up in conversations like this, when we know for a fact Israel has very good relations, to the point of allies with the United States and with the West.
So the United States has a good relationship
so,
with.
okay.
The UK regularly votes against Israel in the United Nations. Regularly.
That doesn't mean that because maybe
America
Israel does the
doesn't.
wrong thing.
America does. No,
there we
America
go.
doesn't. So if you want to talk about relationships, you may think they do the wrong thing. I disagree. But the Balfour Treaty was in
Don't
1970.
engage.
Okay. So just to come back to your point. So in 1948, when Israel was created, Britain didn't vote to recognise it. What was supposed to happen was Britain were only given the mandate of Jordan, Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza on the condition they make a Jewish homeland there. They went back on their word and they didn't create any homeland. Instead, the first thing they did, they gave Jordan, which was 75% of mandatory Palestine, to an Arabian family, not Palestinian, who were living there.
I've got to go. My wife's going
Take
to
care,
kill me.
bro.
Thanks very much,
Nice talking to you.
Joseph.
Always a
Wait,
pleasure.
We'll wrap this one up soon too. But yeah, sorry. No, I agree with all of that. I understand everything you just said. I'm saying that having the ability to question that is very important. And actually, when we're questioning that, actually looking at it from the perspective of the Palestinian people, the actually little people, not Hamas or the people who are ruling, the actual little people who are suffering in Palestine.
Yeah.
And actually, to take a point from the Israeli, I know you're going to say Israel's are victims, they always get invaded, America doesn't like us, England votes against us.
No, America does like
blah,
Israel.
blah,
I've never
blah.
said that.
Okay,
I've
let
never
me
said
finish
that.
quickly. Yeah, you're going to say this stuff. And but I'm saying that regardless of all of that, Israel is still in a dominant position within the Middle East, within all of its neighbors. Israel could take on all of its neighbors and win easily. So I would say that because of that, Israel has, and the point that I started on, it's becoming on Israel to actually take that position and to say, and actually I think the Israeli people and all the people who support the state of Israel should be saying to the Israeli government, yo, chill a little bit, relax, don't worry about Hamas, they might throw rockets, they might throw some grenades, whatever, cool, let's evacuate those zones a little bit, move people around, maybe make that military-only zone, don't shoot back, just make sure when they throw grenades you all get out of the way for a little while, and let's actually have some negotiations, because actually these people are angry, they're suffering, a lot like those angry men you're talking about, weren't even alive when all of these issues started, they're just born into a world which is F for them, yeah? And so I think that the issue is that the Israelis need to stop getting on this defensiveness or victim mentality of thinking everyone's against them all the time, because your state is there, it's living, it's alive, nobody's troubled it. And after World War II and everything that happened to the Israeli or the Jewish community, Israel has actually been able to build itself up to a massive position. When you look at everything that happened to African nations and what's happened to Africa, nobody's saying anything about them. They're still getting raped. Western countries are still stealing and putting in coups whenever they want. You got people like Mark Thatcher going into their countries to start coups whenever they want. So all of this idea that I'm coming up with conspiracy theories when I say that secret agents work in people's countries to overthrow things or get things done, it happens. We see it happening in Africa all the time, yeah? So I'm just saying the Israelis should take a bit more, be a bit more happy about the position they're in, because they're in a very good position. The Palestinians aren't in such a good position. So chill out, relax, say, you know what, actually we're not victims anymore. We're actually winning in this game called life. The Palestinians are the ones who are suffering right now. They're suffering very similar to the way Jewish people have suffered in the past. So we should take sympathy upon them and actually look after them as best as we can. And actually, if it means that we might have to change this name from Israel to Palestine, if it means that we have to give Palestinian people more land than they have right now, if it means accommodating some Palestinian needs, then that means that that's calm, because we actually got nukes and weaponry that could blow anyone off if they want to disrespect the Israeli state.
To respond to those points, so I think this is one of the tragedies or the benefits of living in the luxury of the West. A month ago, a good friend of mine was murdered by a Palestinian terrorist. Yeah. So for you to sit there and say that they're strong, they're this, they're that, I'm not belittling.
Bro, this is London. Look, we got bombings on trains.
How many people do you? How many of your
bro,
friends have been killed by
bro.
terrorists?
My friends been killed by
how many of your friends
terrorists.
personally?
Have been killed by stabbed, or been shot by police, or been strangled to death by police saying they were stolen drugs. I've got friends who've been killed in this country, bro. Don't talk to me about terrorism. Black people have been getting terrorized for hundreds of years,
okay,
bro.
Calm down.
Okay, because you're trying to act like you're the only one that's got
We need
victims.
the definition of
That's what I'm trying to say.
No, you're saying
like
you
you're the
came to
only
me.
ones
You
with
came to me.
victim that can
You
have
came
whole
to me and
victim
said my people should just take it.
I didn't say you should take it.
You did. You said they
I
should
said
build
take
military zone. You should create a military zone. If they fire missiles at you, you should just ignore them and take it. I responded to you that a friend of mine was recently.
You're ignoring the solution.
Your solution was they should call it Palestine. They shouldn't fight back.
I said they should call it Palestine. I said if that's what it takes. But if you actually listen to what I'm saying, instead of creating these straw men, man said when I said create this military zone, I wasn't saying give in or give up that land. I'm trying to say to you that if people are being shot on the border because people are protesting that border, evacuate people from that land. Don't get people shot. Evacuate them from one second, let me finish. Evacuate them from that land whilst you work on discussing a solution with those people who are protesting into your area. So I'm actually telling you, be rational about it. Take some time. You say, look, this is not a safe place for you to live right now. Move from this place and let's actually come to a solution with our neighbours. So that's the point that I'm making right there. That's the point that I'm making right there. I'm not trying to say to you, Israel should take being shot or being killed or any of this random stuff you're trying to talk about. And so allow me with all the victim thing about your brethren getting shot or whatever. Because everyone's got friends who have been killed or been stabbed or died by police. It's calm, innit? So we can all go down that route.
Okay, so if you want to just belittle, if you just want to belittle,
you're the one that's belittling, but it's calm. Innit?
No, I said how you said. It's all on camera. It's all on camera.
What did I say?
You said that if they fire rockets at you, if they do, you should create a military buffer. You shouldn't fight back. You're the stronger force. And I said a friend of mine was killed a month ago by a terrorist.
Where?
It's very easy while we're sitting in Israel. It's very easy while we're sitting in our ivory tower. Can I just finish? I listened to you. You spoke a lot. You spoke a lot. You're not letting me respond. You're not letting me respond.
Last time because I was trying to explain to you that I'm not sitting here in the ivory tower. I'm sitting here from a position of where we've lost friends here in the UK and where we've had to turn the cheek in the same sort of situation. So I'm trying to explain to you that whilst you might think you're living in an extreme situation where your friend's been killed, so I can't turn my cheek, I'm trying to say to you that many people, including here in the UK, lose friends in similar situations.
There's no equivalency to the suffering that you face in the UK as a black man and say a Palestinian in Gaza or a Jew in Israel. There's no comparison. They're war zones. They are literally war zones. Tens of thousands of rockets have been fired into Israel. Just as similarly, like the death toll in Israel, amongst Israeli and Palestinians, is far higher than whatever death toll you believe that the black community here suffered at the hands of.
I don't think you're listening to the point I'm making. I think you're always doing this, I don't know, straw man thing. Like, it's weird in this part. This is the point I'm making to you, right?
Okay, make your point and then let me respond to your point.
You made a point that your friend died the other day. And so therefore, we sitting here in the UK who are sitting in ivory towers don't understand the situation in Israel. And I'm saying to you, no, I understand the situation.
No, I said it's very easy for us to say turn the cheek.
Okay. What I'm trying to say to you is if people are being killed on the border, then maybe people shouldn't be on the border. Maybe create a safe zone on the border so Israeli people don't get killed on the border anymore.
Why not create that by that logic? Okay, go on. I mean,
Israelis have the strength, right? So because you keep getting my argument wrong, and I just want to make my argument very clear. So when you respond to this, you're actually responding to what I'm saying and not trying to mischaracterize what I'm saying. Yeah. So I'm saying to you, my suggestion about this border is not about Israelis giving up land or giving up space or not fighting back. I'm trying to say to you, in order to create peace, if you have all the power, the weaponry, machinery, you can create an evacuation zone in that area to make sure no more Israelis get shot or killed by terrorists on that border. So you got a leaf there in the head. On that border, yeah? You can make sure, right, a peaceful zone on that border, right? And I'm saying that if any Israelis come through then, you can make sure that minimize any killing or death while you actually try and come towards a solution of peace.
Okay,
so I'm trying to say that there makes a little bit more sense to me than continuously, when that happens, indiscriminately firing rockets and bullets back and killing lots and lots and creating a lot more animosity. One second. And the point that I was trying to make to you, when you brought up your friend that got killed, I'm trying to say to you is I do understand the suffering of losing people in unjust situations. I do understand the suffering of losing people and actually wanting to respond or wanting to retaliate in a bad way, right? And people here in the UK have felt that situation, including the 7/7. I know people who have lost people in that 7/7 bombing who wanted to get up and are Muslim, who want to get up and want to get angry with Muslims in that situation. So I'm saying to you, I understand that people go through trauma. I'm not trying to say that what we go through here in the UK is exactly what they go through. I'm trying to say to you that I could understand what's happening there. But the point I'm making is not that there's an equivalence between the two, but if you want peace between the two, what you want to do is actually think what's going to lead to peace. And if you're the bigger person with the bigger weaponry and the bigger machinery, you actually have the power in your hands to make peace. And that's the point I'm making.
Okay, so can I respond to that?
Yes, you can.
First and foremost, one quick question. Just answer. How big do you think Israel is, like as a nation? Like in terms of size, what country is it comparable to?
I mean, you just said Wales.
So it's about the size of Wales, but you can literally walk across Israel from the West Bank to Israel in under a day. It's not a big country. It's a very small country. You can see the sea from the far side of Israel.
Like Grenada.
Yeah, it's a tiny little nation. Now, for your solution was to create a buffer zone on the Israeli side. Yeah.
I said you can create a buffer on the border, which is causing issues. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the missiles that they're firing from Israel, how far from Gaza into Israel? How far do you think they reach?
I'm asking you.
So this is they fire from Gaza all the way to Tel Aviv, from Lebanon all the way to Tel Aviv. So basically, from all sides of Israel, it doesn't matter where you are, Tel Aviv can be bombed.
How often do those missiles hit?
Pardon?
How often do those missiles hit?
Say that
Those
again.
missiles that they fire, how often do they hit?
They hit regularly. Regularly.
So
Yeah.
you don't have any anti-missile machinery?
No, we have machinery, but we have the Iron Dome. But Israelis are still getting killed by rockets that Hamas fire.
Oh, so you have a dome.
And it doesn't get all the missiles.
But this is the thing. How many dead Jews is enough for you to actually say, there's a problem here? Because what you're basically saying is not enough Jews are getting killed by Hamas for us to take this threat seriously. So how many would be enough?
I'm saying to you that if people are getting killed, the solution, in my opinion, isn't necessarily saying, you know what, we have bigger guns, let's kill them even more. The solution would be, actually, if there's an issue here, let's try and find a solution. Let's try and let's minimize death on our side while trying to find peace on the other. And that's what I'm trying to say to you.
This is the problem.
And then one second.
I mean, you've done a lot of talking.
Yeah, for sure, but you just keep cutting me off every time I do start speaking. This is why I end up talking for so long. Because every time I speak, jump in and get... Bro, I just let you speak freely. I didn't jump in one bit just there. But after I finish...
The camera will be the judge of that.
The camera will be. Go and rewind the last minute when he was just talking all about the bombs coming in and the distance between Wales and walking across that. Didn't jump in at all. I only answered his questions when he was talking. It's only when I'm talking and he starts jumping in, he starts doing this weird kind of back and forth thing, which is, it's not conductive to a conversation. So when I'm speaking, I'll speak and I'll finish and then you can speak. Even if I say something that you don't like and you want to jump in and defend
Do you know what
Israel,
my response is to what you said?
He's doing it again. Cool.
You don't know what my response to your solution is because I haven't got to it yet.
No, you did, because you were just talking about the missiles reaching Tel Aviv, etc., and then we started talking about the Iron Dome, right? And then you made the accusation of that.
How did we get onto the Iron Dome?
How many Jews would you ask me specifically?
Okay, the camera will judge you jumped in with the Iron Dome. You said, do you have the weaponry to stop it?
Yeah, I asked you a question. You answered.
That's called jumping in.
No, and then you asked. Yeah. Okay, I jumped in to ask you a question. You gave the answer to that question, right? Because you were making a point about the missiles coming in, and I asked you, so you don't have anything to protect yourself from the missiles, right? It was just a fair question in the middle of the conversation. You went on to talk about the missiles, right? And this is weird because now I'm explaining the whole conversation back to you. You went on to say that the missiles get hit and they hit certain Jews, and I was like, okay. And you said, how many Jews? You got real upset and defensive, and you asked me a question. So this right now is me still trying to respond to that question about how many Jews would have to die before I say it's a problem. He hasn't let me say that, and like the answer is, I'd say none, right? I don't want any Jews to die. It's a problem anyway. The whole issue in the Middle East, the whole way Britain handled it, the whole way the end of the war happened, or the end of the First World War happened. The whole First World War in the first place was a whole European mess being imposed on the rest of the world in the first place, let's be fair. But they left the whole situation a mess. We've been dealing with it ever since. And right now, all I'm trying to say is I don't want the Israeli side has superior weaponry. They have a dome that defends them from missiles and from bombs. They have a whole blockade, which means one side really can't even get missiles or bombs in without really high-tech smugglers. And they're just in such a commanding position. I don't understand the need for victimization or the idea to see themselves as victims and actually not see the other side as the victims in the situation. Say to how can we actually help this situation? And I think if they've done that, the Israeli people there would actually, the Palestinian people would actually abandon groups like Hamas a lot quicker and would actually be willing to work with Israel. But I think Israel has this really ultra-militant attitude typified by this guy who just wants to defend Israel at all costs because he really feels under threat. I don't see why, because Israel...
You don't see why Israelis feel under threat?
I feel Israel is completely secure compared to most countries in the world. The weapons, the nukes, the entire state is completely secure.
Every nation that surrounds Israel wants to see it destroyed.
None of them could do it. It's funny that.
How many times has? Please, can I let you do a lot of time. How many times has the UK been invaded in the last 100 years?
It hasn't.
Thank you. How many times has Israel been invaded?
We said 4 or 5, something like that.
Exactly. So we had the 48 war, where 8 Arab armies attacked Israel. You can roll your eyes, but it's not your family that are getting killed. So you had 8 Arab armies invading 48. You had 67 war, where basically all of our neighbours were fighting. We had the Yom Kippur War in the 70s. There's been so many, and you had the war with Lebanon. You've had continuous war. You're surrounded by people that want to see you destroyed, and your solution is that Israel should. One of the propositions was Israel should call itself Palestine.
That was my solution.
Let me
keep doing the straw man thing, so I have to jump in whenever you do it.
Okay, but
that wasn't my solution.
Okay, so if it wasn't, the camera can correct me.
Even if.
Exactly. So thank you for that.
So even if.
I said even if, right? So
okay, fine.
But was that me putting across my solution? Or I said if that is a solution, right? So it's any
okay,
solution.
so
I'm saying any solution is proper. So if you want to characterize my argument properly, say you were saying any solution that will take, basically.
And so
there we go.
Your next thing you offered was there should be a buffer zone on the Israeli side, not on the Gazan side. It's not that Israel should take land, put a buffer zone on Gaza, but Israel should give up its own tiny. Israel, like Gaza and the West Bank, is a tiny piece of land. But your thing was that they should give away even more of their land to create a buffer, even though the missiles will reach Tel Aviv and every single population centre in Israel. So your solutions are largely coming from a place of ignorance, with the greatest respect. They're coming from a noble place. We both want peace. So you're coming from a noble place. You want peace, I want peace. We both want that.
Sure.
But I don't want peace.
I'm not sure.
Okay, maybe you don't want peace. I do. I campaigned for it for over 10 years. My record is online. It's everywhere. Like, how many times have you met Palestinians in Ramallah? How many times have you been to Rawabi? How many times have you been to Batunia? I've been to all of these places. How many Palestinian friends do you have?
Do you feel insecure?
Pardon?
Do you feel insecure?
When I'm there, yes, I have to wear disguise.
Do you feel insecure right now? Because right now you're listing stuff like you feel you need to prove for yourself.
Because you said you're not sure that I want peace.
I said, am I not allowed to not be sure? Is that a problem for you?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Let me try and relax. Let me try and.
It's a horrible thing to say.
Calm down.
Because what you're saying is that I want war. If I don't want peace, I want war. And that's a horrible accusation to make.
I mean, I didn't make any. Please say calm down. Please. You need to relax a little bit and calm down. Because we actually started off having a very calm conversation, like about an hour ago.
Down a little bit. And also help him with the arguments.
Yeah, please do. So all I'm trying to say, sorry, you're talking.
Okay, so my understanding of the solutions you proposed were buffer zone, potentially renaming, not fighting back because you have more arms, and saying that Israel is the biggest military force in that region and it could crush all of its enemies. One of the mistakes that I think many people in the West make is they say it is an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's not an Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's an Israeli-Arab conflict. The Palestinians, you're right, are not a strong military force. Whenever Israel's been invaded, it's been from the surrounding Arab nations. When Iran talks about wiping Israel from the pages of history, that's not the Palestinians, that's not a guy sitting in Ramallah, that's a guy sitting in Tehran, that's a guy many, many miles away. So to view it as, and that's not even Arabs, that's Persians, to view it as an Israeli-Palestinian conflict is mistaken, in my opinion. It's an Israeli-Arab conflict.
Israeli-Muslim conflict, would you say?
I would say, yeah, an Israeli-Muslim, but not all Muslims, because Israel has Muslim allies. Netanyahu recently went to Oman.
Not all Arabs, but I'm saying as a general. Very broad speaking.
The main thing everybody expects Israel to give up everything. But if Israel were to do the things you say, no. Well, you said even its name was one of the things that they could do.
Anything in the quest for peace, because if we want peace, we're willing to do anything.
Should they give up their people's lives?
So once again, I didn't say that anyone should give up any lives. But I think what I've been trying to say, I think maybe it's being missed.
Okay, maybe it is. So
what I'm trying to explain basically is that Israel have the superior weaponry, the superior power, and are sitting in a superior position above all of its surrounding enemies, or people who see themselves as enemies or want to threaten Israel. All completely, right? Completely swamps them or dwarfs them. Yeah. So what I've been saying, I think I've been saying this quite consistently, that Israel should do whatever it can to not cause any death or war or violence on the other side, to protect Israel, including if that means creating a buffer zone on the border where they're getting shot or people are cutting through the fence, as you put it, right? To create a buffer, because that's the problem I was talking about the buffer zone for. I was talking about the missiles.
There is a buffer zone, by the way.
People who are cutting through the fence. Okay, they're already doing it. So
they're listening to you.
Exactly. Maybe make the buffer zone a little bit bigger. A little bit bigger. But that's what I was talking about, right? So they should take any solution which doesn't include launching missiles back into Palestine or attacking back into Palestinian areas.
Do the Palestinians have any responsibility in this?
100,000 trillion%. I would say Hamas completely, I would say, should not even be leading. From what I'm hearing of them, I don't know much about them, but from what I'm hearing them, they clearly shouldn't be leading, they shouldn't be in power. Clearly the Israeli people, the Palestinian people who are at the bottom of society, who are actually really experiencing all the issues, really should be in some way empowered to take control for themselves. And actually, I know there's been attempts at democracy and elections in these areas in Palestine and so on. There have been attempts in the past and so on.
The last one was 12 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. It hasn't gone so well. I'm saying there's been attempts, so this is my point. So, but that shows that there are people who want something. They want a change. The issue is that I'm saying to you is, if those people on the ground can see that there is a big superpower called Israel beating them down, that is going to be the focus of their enmity and their anger. Whereas Israel, are in a position, in my opinion, to differentiate and see quite clearly, actually, the people who are protesting can't actually harm us. Most of them missiles that they're launching at us can't actually really harm us. Actually, what can harm us is if we actually create an issue where we can make it look like we want to crush the Palestinians and we want to take Palestinian land, we want to build on their settlements and on their turf. One second, on their settlements and their turf, and if we keep pushing this image, and this is what the world sees, and this is what I see from Israel, that Israel wants to build wherever they want, whenever they want. They don't care about the Palestinians. This is what image I get from Israel and the Israeli thing, and the only thing that matters to them is Israeli lives. One second, let me finish. So this, whether it's accurate or not, I'm trying to explain to you the image that I get from it, right? And I'm trying to say to you that Israel could do a lot more, in my belief, to actually be a lot more peaceful in the situation, because like I said, it's like, I'm not a murderer, but it's like the harm that Palestine could do to Israel is nothing compared to what Israel could do back to Palestine.
So
and because of that, I think Israel should really think strategically about what it's doing for the long term, and this is actually causing more enemies and more hatred towards Israel than it is in anything else.
To that point, and I think intention is everything. And so, just a yes/no answer. Do you believe today, you said that Israel's got nuclear arms, it's got a mighty army. Do you think, yes/no, because then I can respond, that Israel has the ability to, if it wanted to completely crush the Palestinians? Because you said it's a superpower.
has the power to completely crush the Palestinians. Yes.
Yeah. And so I think this is one of the most important things to look at when you're looking at these asymmetric conflicts is Israel has the ability to crush the Palestinians,
Militarily.
but it doesn't. Now, what you then do is you reverse it the other way around and you say, okay, so if Hamas were in the same position and they had the ability to crush the Israelis, would they? And I don't know what your opinion, but my belief is that if Hamas could, they would crush the
Palestinian
Israelis.
people?
I agree with that. No,
Okay.
I've got many Palestinian friends.
People I want to talk for.
Pardon? Yeah,
Hamas would-
yeah, and so then we're looking at intent, and I think intent is the most important thing to look at in this thing. So now we know that Israel isn't focused on crushing the Palestinians. So we have to ask, so what is motivating its behaviour? Which I would say that Israel, rightly so, because it's the responsibility of any government, puts its civilians' lives above the lives of the Palestinians. Just like the British put their civilians' lives over the Germans in World War II. That's the natural, or not the natural, that is the appropriate, normal behaviour of a government, is to have the interests of its citizens at heart.
If they didn't, it would be a big problem.
I don't know about
And there's
that.
some
but I
countries
think
that don't.
there's
It's a big problem.
Okay, that's any nation that's ever been at war. The governments that go to war are trying to protect the civil. In most instances, are trying, particularly if it's a defensive one. So we've now established that Israel doesn't have the intention to destroy the Palestinians. We've also established that, like you said, they've got the ability to.
They have the ability. When you say intention, I would say, from what I see, building on the settlements, illegal settlements where they're not supposed to be building. Generally, every time in which they've been attacked, Israel's been attacked, taking more land as a result of winning the wars, would suggest to me that it's not that Israel might not necessarily literally want to outright crush the Palestinians, but a step-by-step, slow approach to displacing the Palestinians completely, having one free, complete Israel might be a long-term goal.
So to respond to that, again, it all comes down to intention. So one of the charges we constantly hear against Israel is either genocide or ethnic cleansing, which is what you basically said. They're trying to get rid of the Palestinians. I can't remember the exact. I can't remember the language. I'm not saying you said genocide. I'm saying they're to ethnic cleansing and genocide. So genocide is when you massacre the people. Ethnic cleansing is when you drive them, you cleanse them from the land. Now, the Palestinian populations in the Palestinian Authority areas and in Gaza have been growing continuously since 1948. So if Israel, which as you said is one of the more powerful military forces in that region,
but the land has been shrinking.
So the land is actually, so it's the opposite. Israel's land's been shrinking.
Since 1948?
Since 1967, yeah.
Okay. But since 1948, it's grown.
So again, it depends where you start. So you're arbitrarily saying that 1948 is when we start counting. I would say you start counting from 21 that they were given the mandate? Britain was given the mandate. So from that point, Israel's land, we lost 75% of what was supposed to be the Jewish state. Straight away, it was given to the Saudi Arabian family, the Hashemites, as we said before. Then we gave away the Sinai Peninsula in the 70s. We gave away huge, basically, in my mind, Israel's given away more land than anyone else. Way more land. They've lost land. And the difficulty is, our neighbours aren't going to be satisfied until all of the land is given away, all the way from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. And that's the issue. And so from my perspective, and keeping my people safe, the thing I'm saying is, if Hamas and Fatah put down their weapons tomorrow, I genuinely believe we'd have lasting peace. If Israel put down its weapons, its neighbours would march on it and destroy it. The Jews will be driven. And the other thing I'd say is...
And what would you do then? What would you do? Oh, sorry, it happened.
It wouldn't happen because the Jewish people will pick up their weapons pretty quickly.
No, but once it's happened, once it's been destroyed, then it's very difficult.
That's not going to happen because the Jewish community aren't going to put down their weapons.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
I get.
I'm
not saying put down your weapons completely, but I'm just saying that some of the excessive firing back, some of the excessive when a war happens, taking more land back, some of the excessive building on settlements which we've been told by the UN not to build on.
I don't believe
Can I create a hypothetical situation? So Israel's engaging Hamas in Gaza, which is Gaza City is one of the most densely populated cities in the world. And so Israel is fighting people where there's lots of civilians that could die. So let's say hypothetically, if Israel before they engaged there were to drop flyers on that neighbourhood and warn them that there's going to be an invasion, maybe that could minimise civilian lives. Would that be a good thing? to minimise Palestinians being killed in Gaza. If they warn before ground
is
invasion.
always a good thing. But
So, okay. Okay, so let's take another hypothetical situation. Let's say Hamas are firing missiles from an apartment block at Israel. Would it be better, rather than just bombing that apartment block and just taking out the Hamas thing, would it be better if they first rang up the apartment block and said, look, to the civilians that are living here, there's a Hamas weapons battery in your basement, on your roof. We need to destroy this arms cache on this battery. Would it be better if they gave the civilians a warning first?
I'd rather you just finish because I'm not sure where you're going with this. And
Okay, I also think it would be better if they do it. If, for instance, Israel went to take out that Hamas battery, which was in a civilian apartment block, and they saw that there were children or civilians on the roof, I think they should abort the mission.
Yeah.
Each one of those situations is something that the Israeli government does today, which is why I'm building the straw man. Because Israel goes to there's no other military that flies, phones and calls off attacking their enemy positions because they fear they may kill civilians. It's very rare. Israel has one of the higher moral codes, and it comes because they're engaging an enemy in a highly populated civilian area. And so the difficulty we have with this, it doesn't matter what Israel does, it's never enough. Like, I would challenge you to find any army that goes to such a... You were talking about recently on the Gaza border, Israel, which is, you said, the mightiest military force in the world, they were firing paintballs at the Palestinians who were throwing grenades at the Israelis.
That's awesome. I think they should do that.
But what I'm saying is, Israel can never do enough.
No. I understand that the Israelis do. But I do also believe that when Israel do, in certain stances, go beyond, like, the whole... I'm not going to go into specific situations because I don't have my statistics or my facts with me right now. But there have been situations where I would say the Israeli army has gone further than they necessarily need to. And I would agree. One second. But I would agree. I am looking for perfection. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I definitely do. I absolutely do, because the point is, nobody's perfect. If you were to take any person in the park and you say, what have you done wrong in your life? And you keep focusing on that, you've done this wrong, but you don't look at what you've done wrong, then what you're doing is you're being unjust.
I'm not looking
so you get my point?
I 100% get your point.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say to you is...
So what you need to do is, instead of looking at perfection, what you need to do is, you need to look at one versus the other. Who's better, who's worse? That's what you really need to do.
Not necessarily. Because I
totally disagree.
I agree, I understand the point, but who's better, who's worse depends on perspective and situations and the place and time.
No,
For
but
example,
all I'm saying is, if you're looking
a
at
frustrated Palestinian
perfection,
teenager, 17 years old, who picks up a gun or a grenade or a rock and he goes to his border and he does something, he's doing something wrong and it's bad, for example. But in my opinion, that for me to see that boy throw that grenade, it blows up, or maybe it hits one of my friends, and I get angry and I grab my gun, I go brrrr, and I shoot that boy and all 15 kids around him, I would say that I was acting worse because one, right? I might say I have emotion, which is bad anyway. But if you look at it overall, I just killed a bunch of people with this machine gun. Only one person was responsible for the crime. I've just blamed a whole bunch of people for one person's wrongdoing. And actually, I got a much bigger weapon, much superior body armor, and all these people are wearing shirts and shorts and little bandanas around their head. And I just ripped through them with a big, I don't know what country Israel gets their guns from, but some big, whatever country made gun, and ripped through those people. Just because they've thrown a grenade. Do you know what I mean? And it's caused death. So when you're saying you're looking between the two different, looking at good or who's worse in the situation, that 17-year-old is bad on any day. Yeah. But that guy who shot him is also bad. I'd say that guy who shot him is worse. Because after that boy threw that one grenade, he ain't got no more grenades to throw. You could actually get him down, pin him down, and deal with him and deal with the people around him. But you just shot a bunch of people you didn't have to kill. And that's the point I'm trying to make. Is it's easy for us to say who's doing worse or who's doing better. But I would say peace is always better.
I understand.
And if you've got good body armor and you've got Iron Dome and you have a lot of these defenses, maybe defend more to defend. Maybe focus more on defenses. Attack where necessary and only ever where necessary, but only ever focus on defending, and peace negotiations.
Peace negotiations.
And I think peace negotiations should include everything, or being willing to compromise on everything, especially in a country which you're talking is only 80 years old. It's a young country. We can redraw borders again. We can rename things. You want this to be your capital, you have that as your capital. We'll have this as our capital.
Okay, now you're going into separate subject.
Why all getting determined that we have to have this piece of land, I have to have this capital, all of this. All of that stuff there for me means that we're not actually prepared for peace. We're only prepared for peace on my terms.
Why don't you let me respond?
Because you're trying to cut me off, bro.
I'm cutting you off because you're making a new point. You're making a new point. I made a point about
I'm making
perfection.
2 points. You respond to both.
Okay.
Remember two
The
things.
point was about perfection. Yeah. If your argument is that,
But I
that
mean,
this,
perfection was a side thing.
You've had a long
asked-
time.
no, but I'm just saying to you.
And I kept
if you
quiet
wanna argue
and
about
only
perfection-
started
but if you want to
interrupting
argue
you
about
because you
perfection,
should
bro,
make
I
a
can't
new
bother
point.
with that because that was a side point.
No, that was
Not
my
ask-
point.
Okay, but it was a
You
side
had-
conversation. What I just explained to you very clearly. It's not about perfection. What I said to
Okay,
you very
so you-
clearly is
okay, so
about
it's not about-
understanding that if I got body armor, I've got
Okay,
iron
so let's
dome.
forget about perfection.
Understand I've got
So
all
let's
of
forget
these
about
things.
perfection.
That's the point that I'm making.
Okay, so let's forget about perfection. I'm going to make a new point now. Okay, here's the thing. When you,
I accept a higher standard, not perfection, a higher standard.
but the reason why I brought out perfection is because whenever he brings an answer, you say, yeah, but what about this? What about this? It gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
No.
And your point,
I said that's all good. I said that's all
yeah,
good.
you say that's all good, but what about when Israel does this thing wrong?
Yeah,
So there's
okay.
no limit to how
because
small it is that
if
they're
we
wrong.
start a discussion discussing Israel overreacting to an attack, then you point out all the times that Israel didn't overreact to an attack. I'm still going to come back and say, yeah, okay, but we were talking about the time when Israel did overreact to an attack.
Yeah, but
Do you
my
understand
point
that? Do you understand that?
Yes, but my point is that what is the limit, right? How small does Israel's problem have to be where you say, oh, that's a major problem, right? His explaining to you that was Israel behaved well. There, Israel
I
behaved
said
well.
that it was good.
Yeah, I know you agreed with it's good, but you gave like a tiny example where Israel behaved bad. My point is,
I'll come back next week. I don't like doing that. But I'll come back next week
is-
with a whole bunch of times where Israel's
my
behaved
point
bad
is,
if you want
okay,
instead.
I'd love you to do that. It's very exciting. But here's my point. My point is that how small does Israel have to be?
Sorry.
How small does the problem that Israel have to do? Right, where you could say, okay, look, that's not a major issue. Nobody's perfect. We don't expect them to be perfect. Right? My problem is that you keep focusing on
Paintballing,
Israel.
I said that's great. That's awesome. I think they should do that. I think they should do more of the paintballing.
Do you
thing.
think
I
any
it was-
country's perfect?
But 1,000 trillion %. There's no country on this planet that's perfect.
Exactly.
So what-
But
can I-
what's
can
the
I-
one
point?
second, but one second.
So what's the
We're
point?
talking
So
to you
if it-
about why are we doing all this whataboutery? I'm talking to him. I'm
what
rather
about
talking to
me
him.
is
It's
like-
like,
no, no,
I
what-
made a bit more.
This
It's not what about
I
you.
made a bit
I've been,
You
I've
bring
been
up
quiet for a
issues.
long
I
time.
made it exactly.
Let me
I want to
just
talk
finish.
to you because I'm making a lot more progress in discussion. when
Okay,
I'm
go on,
talking to
talk to him.
Okay,
Even
so
though
the-
we got a bit emotional and
talk-
passionate.
So the
about it.
whataboutery point, the worst argument you can use is that's whataboutery, because whataboutery is the yardstick. So if we're comparing how Israel's behaving, we have to compare it to other nations. Otherwise, it's just an arbitrary opinion. You have to look at how other nations behave.
I mean, not necessarily.
No, absolutely
Not necessarily.
necessarily.
Because look, if I'm talking to, I've got nieces, right? I'm talking to nieces, and my niece hits on another niece, and then she starts telling me, what about how all the other kids around here are behaving? I'm like, I'm not talking about all the other kids here. I'm talking to you right now. One second. Do you understand the principle of that one thing there of saying to you, we're having a discussion about this situation here. I could go and deal with those people later on. I'm
But
going to have
do
a
you?
discussion,
But do you?
bro. I've come to this week after week for months now. This is the first time me and him are discussing. And the first time we're talking about Israel. You've never seen me on any camera talking to about
It's a
anyone about
question.
Israel.
So let-
It's just a question,
I'm
you can
answering the
answer
question
it.
to you.
So this is
so I'm trying to explain to you is that this right now is not. So please, when I say a whataboutery, I'm not trying to throw off Israel or the discussion about Israel. I'm just trying to say, me and you are having a discussion about what should be the appropriate response in a situation in which where one people are heavily armed and another people who aren't heavily armed. And you could go to me and say America does this, or Brazil does this, or Portugal does this, and that's all well and good. But that doesn't answer the question or the discussion that we're having here.
So,
Do you
so
understand?
to respond, because I don't think you understand what I was I don't think you understand what I was saying.
Yeah.
For you to assess whether your niece has behaved or your nephew has behaved appropriately or inappropriately, you have to compare it to how wider society works. Because that
That's
is
the behaviour of the principles I hold her to.
okay. You draw those principles from society and how other people behave.
From what I expect of my niece.
Yeah, which you draw from society.
I mean, no. not
Intellectually,
necessarily.
just stop and listen.
Okay, cool.
Stop and
Let's
listen
do
to
it
what I'm saying.
intellectually. Yeah, cool.
What I'm saying is how we conduct ourselves, how we assess whether somebody is good or bad. We draw from the values we take from society. It's not in a vacuum. No, you don't have personal moral values. You've taken your values from people that have influenced you, from books that have influenced you. Everything is whataboutery.
I
You
don't
read the
believe so.
Quran.
No, but we disagree
I'm
on
sorry,
that. But now we're going to go into a whole other
even the
discussion.
language you use influences the way that you speak.
100%.
People who speak Chinese
Okay,
think different
cool.
to people who speak English
Okay, cool.
because our language.
So interactions and influence, I get all of that.
So
But
what I'm saying-
basically,
so with
what you're trying to say is there's there's nothing that is innate or nothing that you're born with, and now you're trying to get into a nature-nurture debate. And I'm
not trying to get into a nature-nurture debate.
What I'm trying to say, there are certain things that are natural, and you have natural instincts, and intrinsically certain behaviours which you believe are good, and certain behaviours which you intrinsically believe are bad. And you don't have to see those behaviours first of all to decide that, because you already have within you. So when those behaviours come or they display themselves,
you're mistaken.
When those behaviours display themselves,
I think you can have the discussion either way.
Okay.
You can agree to disagree.
We can talk about nature and nurture, but that's what I'm saying.
What I'm trying to say, which is really important to this conversation, is what about it, as you described it, is looking at Israel, looking at how other nations behave, and that measure of how a nation should behave, you're drawing, whether you accept it or not, it's a fact, from how other nations conduct themselves.
I think the problem is that he's not. Let me give you an example. Supposing you have nieces, right?
Yeah.
And some of your nieces, they're killing each other. Let's say literally, just for a far off example.
Yeah.
And another niece just goes like that, like makes a little twitch of her eye to be offensive. Right, and you never said anything when the other ones are killing each other. Suddenly that niece does a little thing with her eye, and you say, well, "What do you do that for?" And she says, well, "They've just been killing each other. They didn't do anything." He said, "Yeah, but you shouldn't do that." And I'm talking to you now. So why are you talking about them killing each other? So
say what if I was talking to my niece?
Yeah.
That's 100% how I would deal with it, because it's a matter of me and you are talking right now.
Yeah.
Don't try and point to no one else or scapegoat no one else when we're having a discussion.
Okay.
You be a grown woman, and or you learn adult attitudes, and you deal with the responsibility of what we're discussing right now. And 1 second, or the discussion about other people here. If my other nieces were here, believe me, I would have had something to say. I'm a Muslim, right? So if you hear me talk about Islam or talk to Muslim brothers, I don't do it often on camera, but I talk mostly about the fighting within Islam. Or on the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen. I talk mostly about the corruptness, or what I believe to be corruptness, of the House of Saud and Saudi family. Yeah. And I believe the corruptness of what I believe is the general Muslim Ummah throughout the Middle East in general. I don't believe that Muslim countries anywhere are good or in any better moral standard of Israel. And if I was talking to somebody right now about Saudi Arabia, about Dubai, or any of those countries, anyone who was standing here and representing that right now, I would discuss them about that. Probably not on camera. The camera wasn't here when we first started discussing. But we actually had a discussion, because I had never had a discussion with a Jewish person directly about Israel. So I just started asking him questions direct about it. It's not nothing about me ignoring what's going on anywhere else. And this is why I get upset about the whole victim, what I was calling a victim mentality that I believe certain Jewish or Israeli people have, is this idea that people only ever criticize Israel. But it's impossible that somebody might objectively criticize Arabian countries and all the corruption that happens there. And I think it's a lot more disgusting what's happening there to Muslims, under Muslim leaders, than anywhere else,
so
right?
I think
right? But I should be able to have that discussion and have this discussion with you without you going to what about them over there. And I think we can be growing up enough to have those discussions.
I would argue the difference between whataboutism and what I'm saying is whataboutism says, right, that person's killing somebody, that person's killing somebody, and when you talk about that person, the guy says, what about that one? I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that when the level of what you call that they're doing bad, I would say is so low, right, that shouldn't be in the same discussion of all the other things that we're talking about. So back to the analogy that I asked you about with your niece.
About those other things,
back to the analogy I was using about your niece. So supposing, hypothetically, where you didn't say anything to your other nieces, right, but you did say to the one of the nieces with the single thing with the eye, right? You may be right, she shouldn't do it. Let's say for argument's sake that she shouldn't do it. But here's the question. Why are you focusing on something that's so insignificant and not... This is just the analogy. This is not to do with you. Let's deal with the analogy for a second. Why are you focusing on something so insignificant when you're not dealing with the others? Do you think that's a legitimate criticism within that analogy?
Can I add one more thing to that analogy? And now the other side to it is, it's actually not your niece. You're related to the other thing, and you're being critical. So, with the greatest respect, you're Muslim. I mean, I will say for the camera, everything you said that you did is it has actually been a civil conversation. You have been critical of other. You haven't just sat here and attacked Israel. You said you have issues with other nations, and you've named those nations. So that's absolutely correct. But the difficulty with this is, it's like when you have a parent that's very protective of their niece and ignores all the stuff that all the other children are doing because you belong to the ummah.
Believe me.
No, I understand. You gave examples, and I understand that.
On Muslims,
I understand
a lot more pressure on Muslims to do better than I have anyone else in the world. Actually, only other people are Africans.
I understand that. But let's take the specific example with Israel and the Palestinians. Would you go up to a Muslim, right, or let's say a Palestinian, and say it's terrible?
Oh, I'd love to.
Well, let me just finish what I'm saying. You don't know what I'm going to say.
Any Palestinians here?
Well, and if you do, maybe maybe I'm slightly misjudging you. But would you say to a Palestinian, right, it's terrible what Hamas is doing?
When I was at university, I went to a Palestinian society. I done that directly, basically. They give quite a lot. It's very similar to when I've talked to an Israeli person. There's always an argument or a reason behind everything, and both sides have very strong reasons as to why Hamas are doing that. And I said the exact same thing to them. Would it make more sense for Hamas to put their weapons down and engage with peace? And they said the exact same thing. If we put our weapons down, they're just going to crush us and destroy us.
What do you
so if
believe?
everyone's saying that, what do I believe?
Yeah.
I
Do you believe that's true, though?
What in the whole?
What those Palestinians?
No, he said
say?
before. He said
You
Israel
don't
wouldn't
know, okay.
destroy.
I don't think Israel would destroy Palestine.
Okay.
I definitely
Sorry,
don't
continue.
think. What my question would be about what would be the dynamic or the relationship between those who are formerly Palestinians who have now taken on Israeli citizenship or whatever.
What do you think would be a good way of measuring that? Would it be to look at Israeli Arabs, how Arabs in Israel are treated?
Yeah, no, for sure. I'd agree that there are definitely many Israeli Arabs who are living well in Israel, but there are some who would say they're not as well.
So
Like,
do you know any examples
etc.
of them not living well in Israel?
Well, I don't have any that I can bring to you right now, but I saw a documentary of, it was actually looking directly more at the issues that the Ethiopian Jews, I don't know what to talk about that, had, first of all, having to prove that they were Jewish, first of all, and some of the barriers and some racism, which, like you said, there's racism in every state, that the Ethiopian Jews faced. But then they did talk about some Sudanese immigrants a lot more, but I was talking a lot more about the recent immigration,
And
which
as
I
we
don't know
said,
much
I
about.
think actually I disagree with the Israeli government's policy on the Sudanese thing.
Yeah.
But coming back to the Palestinians, well, not Palestinians, the Arabs that live in Israel, the fourth largest political party in Israel is Palestinian, or is Arab. It's called Balad, the joint list. The Jewish prime minister and a Jewish president was sent to jail by an Arab judge, Salim Gibran, who's and so I think the measure of how Israel would treat its Arab citizens, if it was in a powerful position, is to see how Israel treats its Arab citizens today.
But you're talking about a pretty elite group of Palestinians who have the
No. So if you go to Nazareth is booming at the moment. So Nazareth's an Arab city in Israel, and it's got a huge startup economy. Like literally, there are definitely Arab towns like Abu Ghosh, which are doing even better than but the Arabs are not the poorest community in Israel. The ultra-Orthodox Jews are the poorest community in Israel.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I'm not saying that, like, for instance, it's far less likely that you'd have an Arab prime minister of Israel over a Jewish one, just because of the demographics there, and because there's been war after war, and there is tension.
Jewish people
So I'm not saying it's perfect, but there is an Arab could become prime minister of Israel. Whereas you'd never get that in any of the surrounding neighbours. And so I don't think Israel's perfect. It sometimes sounds like I think it is, because the arguments that that are thrown at me here, I often reject. But it all comes back to intent. And so when someone is in that position of power, how they act on it tells you really their true intention. And so Israel doesn't throw out the Arabs from Israel. It actually protects them and gives them rights. All the signs are in Arabic and everything whenever you're driving around Israel. And I actually think the other way around is true. Is if the Palestinians were in charge, I think the Jews would find themselves being thrown out, unfortunately. And that's not every Palestinian. There's a lot of very good ordinary Palestinians,
but the leader
doesn't
mean the Palestinians are all like that. It just means what would happen.
I think the leadership, be it Fatah or be it Hamas, I think if they had it their way, they would drive the Jews into the sea. And the reality is that anyone goes to Ramallah and thinks that the Palestinians, so there are Jews, right-wing Jews, who believe that the Arabs should be kicked out of the West Bank. And anybody who goes to Ramallah and genuinely thinks that's going to happen is delusional. They built up a phenomenal city. It's booming. The Arabs aren't going anywhere from Ramallah. They built a great economy there, and fair play to them. Well done to them, because I'm sure it hasn't been easy, just like it wasn't easy for the Jews in Israel. Similarly, any Arab, any Muslim in this park who thinks that they can drive the Jews from Tel Aviv is an absolute lunatic. The Jews are going nowhere. They built one of the most powerful nations, as you say, in the Middle East. They're not going to suddenly bend over and just say, drive us into the sea, take our apartment blocks, take our skyscrapers, take our industry, take everything, it's all yours.
Yeah, of course not. But most of the world don't want that. They want an equal agreement between both the states. Right?
I think most of the West, I think the Muslim world does want to see Israel, the Jews driven from Israel.
That's not most of the world, though.
I mean, it is 1.6 billion people. It's a lot.
Not all of those Muslims want.
Not all the Muslims,
I don't wanna bring up
absolutely.
the
I mean, more the nations that are in the position of.
I don't want to bring up Israel's history in the UN, but if you did want to use the UN to gauge world opinion, it's always against Israel. And
Yes,
all.
yeah, I thought you were going to say so,
and it's not a
absolutely.
conspiracy theory. I'm not going to hear that there's influence from the Muslim world to change the West to vote against Israel. I don't buy that at all. Most of the world don't like what Israel's doing. But going back to what you said, I mean, I don't think looking at governmental positions for Arabs is any measurement of their quality of life there. Now, you're talking about a people who have significantly less rights than the Israelis. You're talking about a people.
Which people? Just the definition, just so I know who you're talking about.
Palestinians who still
in
occupy
the West
the
Bank
land.
or in Israel?
No, even in Israel, and I'll
Okay.
tell you why. Because a lot of the Palestinians have emigrated from the occupied territories into Israel. So we're talking about a population in both territories who have 9 times out of 10 lost a member of family because of war.
But so have the Israelis, so have the Israelis on both sides.
For sure.
Yeah,
but let's be honest. But we're not
So
talking
the
about
Jews, sorry, Israeli
we're not
Jews.
talking about a war which granted both sides equally with fruit. We're talking about one side who's the oppressor in so many ways. You're talking about the booming market of Ramallah. The currency that switches hands is the Israeli one. So what are we talking about?
That's a
We're
fair
talking-
point. That's a fair point. It is they with
So-
Ramallah, you pay in shekels.
If you were going to make the argument that people live equally, you're deluding everyone, man. I mean, I agree, it's better than a Jew would get in a Muslim country. That's not saying much.
What do you mean
Okay,
by?
so
you know what I'm
just to make some definitions here, I was talking when I was saying about the affluent cities. There's two aspects. One, I was talking about Israeli Arabs. So when I was talking about Israeli Arabs, that's the political parties like the Joint List. That's like Arab Christians are the best performing religious group in Israel, not minority. Sorry, they perform better than the Jews do in terms of education. But when you move over into the West Bank and Gaza, first and foremost, you have to make a distinction between the two places. What goes on in Gaza is horrible. The condition of life is much lower. When you go to the West Bank, so Ramallah, Rawabi, like if anyone looks at a picture, I encourage anyone, go on Google Maps and look at Rawabi. Rawabi is one of the most beautiful cities I've seen. It's more affluent, it looks better than any Israeli city modern Israeli city I've been to. It's beautiful. If you drive around the roads, I always rent a little Kia, like 1 litre car. I'm going so slowly because it doesn't go so fast at such a banger because it's all I can afford. I've got like 1 mile queues behind me of Range Rovers, Ford Mustangs, Mercedes, all with Palestinian Authority plates on them. I got overtaken by a Harley Davidson with PA plates and BMW M3 converter. Like there's a lot of money in the West Bank, but that's different to Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about quality of life, which is a much larger spectrum than what kind of cars some of the elite own. Because we are talking about the elite here. Those Arabs in Israel who have great benefits are not poor. We're talking about those of the elite, of particular families, even from political dynasties. I mean, not all Palestinians are poor Muslims that are being
Are you talking about in Israel or
terrorized.
the West Bank, just so I know who you're talking about?
In both, there's an elite.
But there's elite
I've been
all
to
over the
Ramallah.
world. That's in every
Ramallah is not
society.
indicative of the rest of the occupied territory.
So which
Ramallah is like the London. It's like going from London to Sunderland. You're
Rawabi,
gonna see a very
Batania,
different.
but Batania, all of these
No,
places.
no. Look, you can list them on
I'm listing
your
the
fingers
major
on one
cities.
hand.
Like
That's about
Hebron,
it.
if you
Most
go to
of,
Hebron, not the old city where the conflict is.
we're talking about a territory that is mostly not like this.
No, it is.
No,
it is.
no.
I mean,
No, it's not.
have you just
No, it's not. I've been to the West Bank.
Okay,
I
cool.
wouldn't
So you
speak
have
out
been.
my arse, I'm
Okay,
telling
okay,
you.
good.
Yeah?
So
Now look, I have to be honest. When I went there, I was like, wow, this is much nicer than I
Yeah.
thought. Particularly in cities. Everywhere
Yeah.
else, it's not like that.
So
And I don't have to bring up the facts. These people have less rights than the people over the wall.
So that is a fact. That is a
These
fact.
people circulate.
So you're saying Palestinians who live in the West Bank have less rights than an Arab or a Jew living in Israel?
These people, this
Yeah, I agree
Arab,
with
this
that. I agree
Palestinian
with
Arab
that.
will go to this Palestinian merchant, buy some bread off him, and the note has an Israeli leader that once said Arabs should not belong in this land. This is mad, bro. This is slavery of a different sort.
I don't know that quote you're talking about. You'd have to show me the quote.
Come on, man. Israeli past leaders have no good record of what they said about
So
Arabs. And we have a range of them on Israeli currency.
So just for
I got to go
argument,
now.
I think.
It's been good
It's
talking
been
to you,
really-
brother. Hopefully I'll talk to you again soon as well.
Inshallah. So to your point, I think actually you're one of the more sincere people I've spoke to here because you have accepted a reality that most people don't, which is that there is affluence in the West Bank, not with everyone.
Sure.
And so, for instance, if you go to the Aida refugee camp, it's not, I say refugee camp, it's a city now, it's a big suburban neighbourhood, but it's nowhere near as affluent as Rawabi or Ramallah or any of these big. And so I absolutely accept what you're saying, and I will also accept that.
Talking about the elite.
But I would say that isn't. So to this point, I would say. I would say.
An affluent class.
I would say there's definitely an affluent class, but I would say that's a large class now, and there's not a village it will go to which doesn't have one big, large mansion-type villa, which one family say lives in, and maybe everyone else's houses are a little smaller. And so, but that's the same in anywhere in the world.
I mean, just because you say it's large.
Okay, I can show the camera.
No,
I can take your pictures. I made videos about it.
It depends how you measure it. Like, Dubai is large compared to 20 years ago. Right? It doesn't mean that the wealth that went in there suddenly never used to exist. It existed in another
Let me put it a different way.
Yeah, forget the analogy. You're right. Let's put it a different way. I'm sure that Ramallah 10 years ago was in a poor state.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of investment.
Yeah.
But that's not to say there's a large majority. I mean, there's an increase. I'll give you that. But large is a political point, and I'd be careful with it. We're talking about people who don't have that many rights.
Okay, so
driving around looking at Range Rovers isn't a good indication of how the people in general are doing.
So we were doing whataboutery before, and it's kind of it's irrelevant here. Sorry, not irrelevant. It's relevant here in the sense that if I were to go to other Muslim nations, I'm not talking the Arab states which have a lot of oil, but if I were to go like Eritrea, Sudan, Somalia, places like this, and look at the quality of life of the average Somali or Sudanese guy, it's like the average Palestinian in the West Bank, be they poor or rich, whether they're the elite, is infinitely better. But if you look at global interest in these other communities, no one cares. Muslim aid flows into the Palestinians. European aid flows into the Palestinian. Yet there's a lot of wealth there, and thank God there's a lot of wealth. I don't want the Palestinians to be impoverished. I'm happy that they're building up an economy, because an economy means peace. If you've got a lot to lose, you're less likely to go to war. But all this aid flows into the Palestinian territories, and it doesn't get, like, if I was an Eritrean or a Somali or a Sudanese, I'd be scratching my head and saying, why is the Palestinians the third largest recipient of global aid when I have to walk 2 miles to get water from a muddy hole, and no one cares? My Muslim brothers in Qatar, they don't care about me. Why are they constantly giving money to the Palestinians? So my point is, you have to benchmark a nation. So you're saying you're benchmarking the Palestinians. No. You're benchmarking the Palestinians against the Israelis, and I will be the first person to admit that the average quality of life, the standard of living, the money, the affluence is higher in Israel than it is amongst the Palestinians. Like, absolutely.
No one would disagree with that.
But then if you compare the Palestinians to other states around it, similar Muslim nations, Arab nations, they're doing much better. You don't get that many Ford Mustangs and Range Rovers driving around the cities of... And so that's a different argument, and that's a good point. The freedom of movement is actually a very legitimate argument to bring in this. Yeah, I agree. I think that's a valid point as well. So freedom of movement is one of the big issues. As a Palestinian, it's harder to get out of the West Bank or Gaza than you can get out, but it's much harder than it is for, say, an Eritrean to jump on a plane and fly out. So you've got different things which signify what is quality or standard of life. And so the main thing we got onto here was, I think many people in the West, many Muslims, not yours, so I don't know what your background is, but many people have a misconception of what life is like for the average Palestinian. I'm going to say in the West Bank, because Gaza is very different, for the average Palestinian in the West Bank.
Right, and going there would probably help, do you think?
So one of the things I do is I take Muslims to meet Israelis, to meet Palestinians, and to do tours of that region. I think it's absolutely essential for us to build bridges, for us first to get an understanding of what the reality is, because there's so much misinformation, lies, and propaganda.
There is, but it can go either way. And
yeah, absolutely, on my side as well.
Did go either way. Yeah. If you go there, the first thing you realise that Palestinians are, the elite is far better off than anyone probably knows outside of the territories. The second thing you realise is how many of them have died. Now, you don't really get the idea as a Westerner. You can read the numbers, you can hear the news reports, but when you go there, and everyone you meet has lost someone. I'm talking about immediate family. I'm not talking about someone they know. I'm talking about immediate family. If you've been to the occupied territories, and if you've gone to people's homes, there are murals of martyrs everywhere. We're talking about a huge death rate, and we both know that the murder rate, or use the term you like, but the amount of carnage on both sides isn't equal. We're talking about people, look, so once again, these people might live better than they would in Yemen or something. We're talking about people who have gone through extremely bad times, and it ain't really going that well for many of them to this day. So the increase in improvement is one question, is one factor.
So
Their current state as citizens and the economic freedom they have, etc., is a whole other one, man. And there's no denying that.
So I think you raised some really valid points, and the first thing I would say is, coming back to the whataboutery again, most people don't realise the death toll. So there are more Palestinians killed than Israelis, or Israeli Jews killed than Palestinian Arabs, absolutely. But more Palestinian Arabs have been killed. And nobody wants that. I don't want that, and most Israelis don't want that. But that is a reality of the conflict. But when you look again and compare it to other nations around it, which I have to do because that's how we get the benchmark of what is happening in that region. In Syria, in 4 years, in 4 years you had like 500,000 people killed. In the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on both sides, over basically 100 years, you've had less than 100,000 people killed. Now that's horrible that so many people have been killed, but compared to Iraq, where it's like 1 million in Iraq, Afghanistan, and like there's so many conflict zones where so many people have been massacred and killed, that you have to look at like. You have to look at the conflict in context. So the context you brought, which is correct. So the context that you brought was more Palestinians have died than Israelis, and that's true.
That's a natural comparison to make.
So
right?
I'm just trying to make my point. I listened to your point. Sorry. I'm just trying to make. So the context there is, for you, was more Palestinians have died than Israelis, and so for me, then I step back a little bit further, and for me, I'm looking at a slightly bigger picture, which I'm entitled to do, because that's how I assess. That's how I personally assess the conflict.
Right.
And I see how many Muslims are getting slaughtered by Muslims around the world every year,
no doubt about
and it's huge. But the disproportionate interest on Israel and Palestine, that I have to keep on coming back to, because as a Jew, as someone who's got family in Israel, as someone who has had friends who've been killed by Palestinian terrorists in Israel, as recently as a month ago, the context matters to me. So we're looking at the same conflict through slightly different glasses, and both glasses are legitimate. I'm not saying that how you're looking at the conflict is wrong, it's right. If you look at it as how many Israelis and Palestinians have died, more Palestinians have died than Israelis.
Now this...
So, okay, fine.
Sorry. So this is the question. We both have our contexts, but I'd argue that yours is far from relevant, because as you take a step back further than me, you also get more distant, it seems, because you're making context to things that aren't really related. My context is a relevant one. It's the Palestinians compared to the Israelis, because they both share land in some way. They are under the same economy. I mean, look, there's no debate that the Palestinians shouldn't be compared to Israelis. It's a natural comparison. Now, when you take a step back, you suddenly generalize and you grey a lot of the factors here. You make it into Muslims now. I don't need to make a religious point. You're making a religious point. We don't need to go there. Because you said as a Jew you're thinking that way, fine. As neither Jew nor Muslim, I don't have to confine myself to quite a limited context. We can make any point about Muslims. But we're talking about the dominion of Israelis over Palestinians. So now that's why, if we're going to argue about this, the context must remain there. If you extend it to Muslims in Syria and Iraq, miles and miles away, you're making points about Islam, but they aren't relevant to what Israel.
So to that point, it's really important. And again, it's perspective, and then I'm going to pass it over to my friend here. But my point is very simple. When Israel has been invaded on several occasions, it hasn't been the Palestinians. I mean, they've been one of the fighting forces, but it's been Syria, it's been Jordan, it's been Iraq, it's been Lebanon, it's been Egypt. So it's not. People mistakenly think that this is an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's not. It's an Israeli.
Determine quality of life for Palestinians. What does Israeli military history with other Middle Eastern nations have to do with that?
Okay, can I take it from a different perspective?
Why is this context relevant then?
Let me take it from a different perspective.
Are you going to address that?
I will.
That's the
absolutely.
pressing issue, isn't it?
Absolutely, because I'm going to take a different approach. I'm going to deal with your question directly. Okay, so I'll deal with it by asking you a question. Do you think Israel, the Israeli government, should say, look, there's so few Israelis being killed, let's let a few more Israelis be killed so that'll be closer to be equal? Do you think that would be a reasonable response?
No. Who suggests that?
No, it's a question.
Yeah,
it's just a question.
Okay, I know it's a question. No, I don't. Of course I don't think
right.
that. Probably because no one thinks that.
Okay, so then what is the point of bringing that up? That the difference in parity between the amount of Arabs or Muslims or Palestinians being killed and the amount of Israelis being killed.
Oh, I understand. You came in a little bit late. We were talking about quality of life.
Yeah.
Now, he makes some good points about why quality of life in the occupied territories and in Israel for Arabs is better than most people think. fair point, we've agreed on that. But then I said that there's other factors in quality of life which you can't simply determine from looking at ownership of cars or a slightly booming economy in Ramallah. We're talking about a history which is not resolved in any sort of way, people who have far less rights, and people who have lost far more.
So
like
their quality
friends,
of
family,
life is lower because they've lost more of their friends and
is,
family. I understand.
It's
Can
not
I
easily
address that?
quantifiable, is it? You see what I'm saying? The quality and effect of having huge amounts of your brothers and sisters in your country die.
Yeah, I understand your point.
At the hands of a country which you now have to live under
I understand
dominion.
your point.
Do you see my point?
I understand your point.
So,
can I address that?
Yeah.
So the way to address this is to find out, is to ask who is at fault for that. So you're saying that because Israelis are killing, let me just ask you. Let me ask you, instead of me putting words into your mouth, why don't you answer it? Why don't you tell me who do you feel is more at fault for those people dying, the Palestinians dying? Who do you feel is more at fault, and why?
Now, if I could answer that in so many ways, but what does that give to your argument?
Okay, so let's put it this way.
Quality of life is opposite to what he said, quite severely bad for large amounts of the Palestinian population, right?
Yeah.
Now, us talking about why that's come to be, how does that justify this sort of occurrence? I mean,
No. I didn't say how it's come to
do?
be. Okay, let's put it this way.
You have to be clear about what you're trying to do.
Okay, I'll put it this way. You're saying that the quality of life for the Palestinians is worse for the Israelis. Okay? For those reasons. Right, and let's say I agree too. Okay?
Oh, good.
Okay, so now that we agree, the next question is, and therefore what? Does that mean, are you therefore saying that the Israelis are wrong because of that?
No,
it's just a question. I'm just asking.
No, that's the answer to the question. My
next question
argument was a rebuttal to him saying that it's all sort of dandy for Palestinians, which he never said in those words, but that's the sort of foundation of the argument. It's really not as bad as you guys think.
What's my argument?
And that it's really not as bad as you guys think. Palestinians live much better than, and like...
Which you yourself have said is true, so there's nothing wrong with what I said.
Okay, but the thing is, you see, one doesn't need to stick to one part of the opinion. I can both recognise the increasing market and whatever else in Ramallah, also recognise the pretty miserable living conditions of most Palestinians. And I'm inviting you both to do that as well. You don't need to
I agree with that. But
so
my question
is... who's wrong and right? I mean, that's
because
I
thought
that on a whole other
okay. Because I'm assuming that you're bringing that up to point out that Israel is doing bad. If you're not doing that, it's a misunderstanding.
No. It's
right?
just me sort of checking him.
Okay.
Because there is a narrative here that it's all sort of fine and good.
Okay.
So
he agreed. He agreed 10 minutes ago.
And I said to the camera that Gaza is not a great kid. Gaza is a separate issue to the West Bank, and I said that the condition in Gaza is terrible. So I'm not
minimise it.
So we all agreed, and he agreed already before, that the Palestinians in certain areas, which is a very significant area.
See how you both change it? You say certain areas and things like that. The truth is, a significant majority of the Palestinian population do not live in the ideal way that he demonstrated earlier. Like I said, it's
but neither do the Israelis.
Okay, I'm not saying
neither do the Israelis. I think it's really important to look at the content, like everything. And so you're saying that the elite Palestinians... Are you trying to say
that a comparable amount of the Israeli population live as bad as the same amount in Palestine?
I'm saying there's I'm saying proportionality. I'm saying if you're looking at proportionality, the majority of Israelis are not rich. The majority of Israelis, they're more affluent than the Palestinians, and there is an elite in Israel that's very rich. Just like in the Palestinian areas, the majority are not. I don't think the majority of Palestinians in the West Bank, I have to qualify it as that, are living in poverty. I think there is a very affluent elite who live a jet set, in many cases, a jet set lifestyle. I mean, not so low. In every single village I went to, I saw at least one big villa.
To make it simplified, let's just say we agree that the Palestinians are living worse off. To make it just in very simple terms, let's say we agree. Let's say we agree. What would you say?
We agree that life for Palestinians is significantly worse than life for Israel.
Okay, so let's agree with that. Let's agree with that.
Yeah. So let's agree with that.
What would you say is your next step? what would you say? We agree that.
My name is not Benjamin Netanyahu.
No.
My name is not the Israeli populace who vote for these idiots.
The thing is, are you making a? What's your point with it? That's my question. I'm not saying.
No, I mean,
I don't mean what's your solution.
Can only change domestically, in my opinion.
I'm not saying what's your solution. I'm saying what do you learn from that? No. I'm not
What
saying.
would
that.
I do?
No, I don't mean that. What I'm saying is, what do we know from that? What do we see? You're saying I asked you, does that mean that what the Israeli government is doing is wrong? You said I'm not saying that. So my question is, what are you saying? Do you have any?
Am I not clear or something?
Yes, you're not clear because you're making.
Am I not clear to everyone?
Excuse me, you're talking to me. You're talking to me.
Yeah, no, but come on, we have to get a consensus. What am I not clear about?
I'll tell you what you're not clear about.
To you, go.
To me, yes.
What do you find?
What I find is not clear. First of all, let me say what is clear. What is very clear is, and what we've all agreed on, that the Palestinians are doing worse off than the Israelis, right? What I'm not clear on is what you're saying, therefore that implies. Are you saying there's any implications for that? And if there are implications, what are those implications? That's what's not clear.
Right. Whatever implication you might get,
I'm not getting it, I'm
down to
asking you if there's any implications.
It's all simply a rebuttal to his argument. And I finally got you lot to sort of minimize on the argument, and that was my goal. I don't want to hear no black and white, large narrative.
We've done that. We've agreed. Let's not regurgitate
I invited you guys
stuff.
to recognize the significant lower quality of life for them, which you did.
So we've done that.
The affluent elite is not as big as you sort of claimed at first. I got you to do that. It's just that. It's bringing the argument down to a realistic
His party
level.
agreed to disagree, but let's just agree.
No, but you did agree. You didn't agree to disagree. You did agree.
It's fine points over here. I think you're getting caught
they're
up
important points
in fine points. The question is exactly how much they're disproportionate. We all agree that Israelis doing better. The only question is exactly how much. So let's not argue about the fine points. We all agree that the Israelis are doing better.
No, maybe you're missing the real. I wouldn't do this for no purpose. Now, I sympathise with you guys because you guys do have to fight an uphill battle. World consensus is against you. Most people, there's a lot of anti-Semites. There's no doubt about it. I'm not one of these idiots who don't believe it doesn't exist. There's a lot of this around, yeah? And so when you do make arguments for Israel, I sympathise with you. It's a hard argument to make. But when people from your position make arguments, you sometimes resort to the same level of hyperbole that the other side does. Oh, Palestinians live in complete poverty. Then you reply with, no, actually, they don't at all.
So we've dealt with that 15 minutes ago. So can we move on from that?
Both sides of the argument down to the realistic level.
Yeah, but can we move on from that?
Is that I know you want to move on. I know you desperately want to move on.
I desperately want to move on because I feel like we've done it.
We're wrapping that.
Cool, that's it then.
Not because of anything else. It's just that.
Come take over everything from your
Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen. COE. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. I don't even listen to Sky YG. I just listen to COE. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. I don't even listen to Sky YG. Man, just listen to COE. Man, just listen to COE. Man, just listen to COE. If you see me, it's COE. Content over everything. COE.
Man, not even know BBC. Man, not even know ITV. Not even listen to the MUM. They just listen to COE.